Hi, Deputy Minister Jeffrey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, sorry, just was trying to work. You can hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay, you can see me too. Okay, cool. All right. So all good. I'll just turn off the mic and camera and you'll call me when you're ready. Are you expecting me to speak, or are you going to put questions or raise issues with me? I mean, are you going to lead the conversation, as it were, in terms of asking me things, or are you expecting me to do things?
I'm going to lead the conversation. I have a set of questions that I'm going to ask you, but if there's anything at the end that you'd like to add on, please feel welcome to. Okay. We're going to start off with our board member, Mr. Rashid Sidat, and then it'll be over to us two to have the conversation.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Sharp.
Hi, Mr. Sidat. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. We're gonna start letting people in now then.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Deputy Minister. I'll be doing the opening and the closure. So I thought, my name is Rashid Sidat. I'm a board member of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation.
Hi, Rashid. Yeah, nice to see you and look forward to the event.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to wait until 6:05 just for everyone to join us for the session tonight, and then we'll get the program going. Thank you.
On mute, okay.
Okay, ma'am. This one says, yeah, ma'am.
Appli-
I think, Richard, I think we should start.
Yes. Thank you so
given
much,
that we only have an
everyone.
hour.
No problem. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us tonight. We will be having a conversation with Deputy Minister John Jeffery on the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill. We're looking to educate everyone on this bill, people who may not know, but also just to understand the progress of the bill and when its implementation will be. I'll be handing over to AKF board member, Mr. Rashid Sidat, who will do the opening address for us.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time this evening to join us, I think, on a very important subject, the hate speech bill, a bill that has been in the making for some time now, and we'll hear a little more about that later. Just to repeat, my name is Rashid Sidat, and I'm a board member of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. So my job is really just to facilitate the start and just do the closure of the session. But firstly, let me just take the opportunity to acknowledge the presence of our Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mr. John Jeffery. Thank you, DM, for joining us. And just to say that this event is organized by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation on behalf of the Anti-Racism Network of South Africa, ANSA. So when you hear ANSA is really the abbreviation for the Anti-Racism Network of South Africa. It is a national network of civil society organizations committed to the eradication of racism and building non-racial democracy in South Africa. ANSA is currently coordinated by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation on behalf of the network. So that's why you see the sort of dual branding. And ANSA's flagship initiative is the Anti-Racism Week, which is marked from the 14th until the 21st of March every year. So, well, what is the Anti-Racism Week? It is held in this country during Human Rights Month, which is March, and it culminates on Human Rights Day, which also happens to be the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination on the 21st of March. This Action Week aims to create public awareness about racism and its effects on individuals and broader society. It's about ensuring that there's a countrywide focus on tackling racism and that it remains on the national agenda. So while the Anti-Racism Week is initiated by ANSA, it aims to get all sectors of society involved and encourages self-initiated activities during the week. So it's sort of a diffusion kind of effect that we would like to see throughout the country. And then to zero in onto the issue around that we are dealing with today, which is the hate speech dialogue. And I think we are all aware as South Africans that we've seen, I think, really disgusting displays, public displays of racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia over the past decade. We remember Penny Sparrow and Vicky Momberg, and more recently, the horrible incident at Maseelspoort Resort in Bloemfontein. I don't have to remind our participants today about some of these things. I'm sure it's still upmost in your mind. So the hate speech bill is really a legislative tool. It's a law, in other words, for the combating the scourge of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, which has grown in recent years. And what we are trying to do today during this 1-hour discussion to educate the general public and our participants on the purpose and role of the hate speech bill within the South African legal framework, and specifically to unpack the challenges that have stymied its progression and implementation, and to comprehend the effects of hate speech and hate crimes in our society. I mean, we do know that there's a tension that have been made apparent by some civil society groups, which have said that actually it's, I mean, to what extent are we impeding the freedom of speech? So basically hate speech and you know, does lead to a situation where or the belief that it could impede freedom of speech. So that is the kind of tension that we are dealing with, and we would like the Deputy Minister during the conversation to highlight some of these things. I'm not really going to go into the background to the bill. I'm sure the DM will do so, and some of the specific provisions of the bill, as well as the sanctions that are proposed by the bill. As we know, I mean, just to say, we know that the bill is something that is in the legislative process, in the pipeline, as it were, on its way to becoming a law, and it has to go through a number of phases, and the Deputy Minister can enlighten us on some of those issues. So that is really what we are trying to do today. And of course, as I mentioned, joining our conversation today is Mr. John Jeffries, who's a long-standing Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development. He's been in legislatures in KZN, you know, after 1994, and then joined the National Assembly, I think in 1999, and has been playing a prominent role in our legislative process and as part of the national executive. So we are really pleased that Deputy Minister Jeffries is able to join us today. I also have pleasure in introducing ANSA's anti-racism manager, Ms. Retabile Ratsomo. So, and what Retabile is going to do is she's going to engage in a question and answer session with Deputy Minister, and that will take us, I think, about 30 minutes, and thereafter open the floor, as it were, for questions to participants or from participants, and get some speedy responses, and then hopefully we'll be able to conclude within the hour that has been set aside. So thank you very much, everyone, for making the time, and over to you, Retabile.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sidat. I think you really did explain the purpose of our webinar today. So I'm just going to kick off with the questions and kick us off by just understanding from the Deputy Minister what exactly is the intention behind the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. Just maybe hot off the press news. The bill was approved this afternoon by the National Assembly, so it now goes to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. The party support was interesting. ANC, EFF, IFP, NFP, Good, AIC and PAC supported the bill. The DA, the Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP and Al Jamaa opposed it. But I think the issues are more around, anyway, no, let me leave that. But what is the bill? It provides for crimes of hate or hate crimes. Hate crimes are existing crimes, which, if it can be proved, were committed because of a prejudice against the group that the person, the victim, belonged to, then becomes a hate crime. So an ordinary murder is murder. A murder because you didn't like the race, the religion, whatever of the person, would be then murder as a hate crime. And then the other aspect is the hate speech, which is a new provision. So hate crimes are existing ones. Hate speech is a new provision, and that is following basically the wording in the Koilane judgment. I'm trying to remember it, but it's basically, you can't say anything that's with a clear intention to be harmful or to incite harm and to promote or propagate hatred. That would be hate speech. The groups are smaller, or the grounds rather are the groups that people can belong to are smaller, and there is a partial exemption for artists, academic, scientific inquiry, reporting, media reporting, and proselytizing, interpretation, proselytizing, espousing of religious convictions. There, it's a higher bar. You can't advocate hatred that constitutes incitement to cause harm. So that's roughly it. Then there's better provision for the victims or their families, more serious penalties, national instructions to the police relating to the investigation of these cases, and directives to the prosecutors relating to their prosecution. There's reporting, because part of the problem is that we're not able currently to record all the cases. And then there's a section on prevention. So that's roughly the bill in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. As you mentioned, it does this law does bring into effect two separate crimes, that being of hate crime as well as hate speech. Maybe if you could just clarify for everyone, what is the distinction between the two crimes?
Okay, as I said, a hate crime is an existing crime. The issue is whether the state can prove what the motive, or whether the motive was because of a dislike, a prejudice against the group the person belonged to. So, as I said, a murder that is, the person was specifically targeted and killed because they were Black, because they were Muslim, Christian, Hindu, gay, lesbian, etc., becomes murder as a hate crime, and then the different procedures in the act follow. A hate speech is about communications, and that's communications that are that can be reasonably construed to demonstrate a clear intention to be harmful or to incite harm, and to promote or propagate hatred against a group as well.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. So I think we just need to also understand, since the bill hasn't been passed yet, what are some of the other forms of protection that currently exist for victims of hate crime and hate speech? You did explain that hate crime is already a crime or an aggravating factor within the criminal system, but maybe if you can explain just what is there currently that deals with these two.
Yeah, well, look, as far as the current situation, you would get found guilty of murder, assault, arson, whatever, just ordinarily, not as a hate crime. When you're found guilty, the motive, the fact that you were motivated by the dislike of the group, then is something that can be led as evidence in aggravation for a heavier sentence. One of the things that the bill does is elevate hate crimes. It makes them more serious. So if you take the incident in the Free State, Marselspoort, okay, they got charged with attempted murder, I think, for holding the one boy's head underwater. I don't know if that would hold, but otherwise it would probably be just ordinary common assault. Whereas if this bill had been passed, then the charge could have been assault as a hate crime. And it would have then had to have been in the regional court. All hate crimes, hate speech cases need to go to the regional court. Yeah, it would have been elevated as more serious. Hate speech, currently we've got a common law crime called crimen injuria, which is an old Roman Dutch crime. It's a little bit unclear, and it hasn't, I mean, people have been prosecuted under it, like Penny Sparrow, but they generally haven't fought. They've just accepted the lot. They've accepted I did wrong, punish me. But for example, it's an issue with crimen injuria as to it's meant to be about harming a particular individual, not a group. So in Penny Sparrow's case, she didn't defame or insult any particular person. She insulted Black people generally. Vicky Momberg was definitely crimen injuria there. She had a racist row with the traffic police who stopped her. But most of the matters are broader issues. So that's a problem with crimen injuria. We've got Papuda, which does provide for taking a matter to the Equality Court. We've just seen the successful resolution of Steve Hofmeyer's homophobia. And it was the Equality Court provisions in Papuda that went to court in the Kwelane matter. But the problem with Papuda is it's civil. The onus is on the victim, the survivor, to take the matter up. Whereas if it's a crime, then the onus is on the state to deal with it. So even though the Steve Hofmeyer matter was successful in the sense of a settlement, and he's apologized and he's paid money, the Human Rights Commission had to be involved. There was a whole lot of involvement of organizations to push this thing. If it had been if there'd been hate speech, the state could have then charged him for hate speech.
I think you've been able to explain to us just really what are the advantages of having the hate speech and hate crimes bill passed into law. Maybe if you could just share with us what has delayed the progression of the implementation of the bill.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the bill was introduced in 2018. I suppose the first delay was that Parliament couldn't finish it before the elections in 2019. And that's always sort of, a bill can be revived, which this one was, but, you know, they had public hearings. It was a different committee, different people. So that was the first problem. But the second problem was wanting a resolution on the Kwelane matter. Because one of the issues is that Section 16(2) of the Constitution sets out what is not protected as as free speech. And that particularly is speech that's propaganda for war, incitement of imminent violence, or advocate of hatred that is based on race, ethnicity, gender, or religion, and that constitutes incitement to cause harm. In Mr. Koilane's matter, he didn't advocate any hatred on any of those factors. It was homophobia, which is not there. And the court accepted, the Constitutional Court accepted that it could be, using the limitation clause on the right of free speech, that homophobia, sexual orientation, could be a ground on which there could be hate speech. But it was really not possible to process, to complete the bill until that issue was resolved by the court. I think the High Court ruled in favor of the Human Rights Commission, the Supreme Court of Appeal ruled in favor of Mr. Koilane, and the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the Human Rights Commission. So the bill, sorry, just to finish, the committee then started processing the bill after the Koilane judgment, had public hearings, and then they've been at it effectively since about August, September last year, with quite intensive, a lot of meetings, a lot of work was done on the bill.
You did mention now just some of the limitations that would be placed on freedom of speech if the bill was to come into act, as to become an act. Maybe you can just share more with us and the audience as to what are the limitations that have been placed on the constitutional right to freedom of speech.
Well, look, you can't, as I said, the basis of the crime is you can't communicate something that could be reasonably, so it's an objective test construed to demonstrate a clear intention to be insightful or to incite harm and to promote or propagate hatred based on one of more of the grounds. Now, the grounds basically are, you've got two categories. You've got the characteristics which apply to hate crimes, and you've then, which is basically A to P, I don't know the numbers, and the grounds are actually much shorter, which is A to J. So there's some issues that something can be a hate crime. So one of the issues, one of the characteristics for a hate crime is if the crime is committed because of the person's political affiliation or conviction. Because people in KwaZulu-Natal got murdered because they were ANC or IFP. Occupation or trade is also a characteristic. So if the crime is committed because you are a sex worker, you are a taxi driver or a bus driver or something, that would be a hate crime. Neither of those categories, and I use them as examples, are included as restrictions on hate speech. And that was basically, well, there may be nasty things said about people because of their political affiliation. We didn't want to get into a situation where people could say, no, you're limiting political debate. When it comes to occupation or trade, nasty things can be said about sex workers, about hawkers, but we didn't want the restriction to be used to say, no, you can't insult politicians. Basically the grounds are albinism, ethnic or social origin, gender, HIV or AIDS status, nationality, migrant or refugee status or asylum seekers, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression or sex characteristics, and lastly, skin color. So those are the issues that you've got to be careful that you do not say something that is harmful or could be seen to be inciting harm, and that is promoting or propagating hatred against those people. So, you know, a lot has been raised about, and ultimately it's the, well, let me just also say the decision to prosecute will be taken by the Director of Public Prosecutions. That's the provincial head of the NPA. They can delegate that power down, but it can't be done by your ordinary prosecutor. So you can't have police arresting people for hate speech unless they've been authorized by the DPP of the province. So, yeah, and ultimately it's the court that's going to decide whether you did commit the crime or not. As I said, there's a higher bar for artists, scientific academic inquiry, reporting in the public interest, and proselytizing, where there you can't advocate, and this really just follows the wording of section 16(2), what is not hate speech. You can't advocate hatred that constitutes incitement to cause harm. So basically, for the ordinary population, if you say Muslims are sinful people, terrible people, whatever, that's harmful and it's promoting hatred. But if you say that when you're preaching, and it's not limited to preachers, it's basically anyone who's, you know, trying to preach, then you'd have to actually do more than just saying nasty things. You'd have to actually incite harm against people. Muslims or Christians must be a terrible people. They must be attacked and killed, as has happened in our history with the Crusades and things like that.
Thank you for that, Deputy Minister. I'd just like to add on to that and ask, currently as it stands, we see groups like Operation Dudula and some senior members of government as well who spew quite insightful and hateful remarks towards migrants in South Africa. Would those kinds of sentiments be covered under this bill?
I think they would. We did, as a result of the public hearings, or rather Parliament did, it was, I think, before nationality, migrant or refugee status, and asylum seekers was added to widen it. So I think you've got to be careful about what you say about migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers. Obviously, nationality is a given, but those are the more vulnerable groupings.
Thank you. I think also just leading from that, could you explain to the ordinary South African how this process would look like if they were to open a charge, and what process would ensue after that?
Look, they would need to go to a police station and lay a charge of hate speech. One of the things with the bill is the national directives for the police, or the national instructions for the police, because the police service is very big. So you may end up in a charge office where people don't know what this thing is. So part of the bill is that the National Commission of Police must issue national instructions relating to the reporting of a hate crime or hate speech, and how they're to be investigated by the police. And then also they must have training courses on those national instructions, and social context training, etc. So in theory, when the bill is passed and comes into effect, people would report it at the police station. However, a fair amount of work would need to be done by the police in terms of the national instructions to ensure that the police at the charge office are ready to receive these cases.
I think just on that point, you have also highlighted just some of the necessary interventions that might need to go along with the promulgation of this bill. Maybe you could just share with us what are some of the other kinds of programs or interventions that government is looking to have run concurrently with the passing of this bill that will look to either change the perception of those who spew hateful remarks or commit hate crimes, or whether to rehabilitate them? Is there any kind of plan from the government to work alongside with this bill once it's been passed?
Yeah, this bill is not the panacea, the answer to racism and intolerance in South Africa. It's just a small part. It's basically the stick. that it will allow us to, there's a rise in hate crimes across the world and hate speech. It will allow better monitoring, analysis of data. But there's other, well, I would say we're never going to actually, my own view, end racism in South Africa when wealth has a largely white face and poverty has a black face. So there's broader issues that have to be addressed relating to the inequality in South Africa and the racial nature of that inequality. So there's a lot of work, other programs that needs to be done. We've got our national action plan on racism, xenophobia and related intolerance. I think that the Kathrada Foundation plays a very important role in these issues. We've got to build social cohesion. So we're not seeing this bill as the answer to racism or intolerance. It's just a small part of the strategies being followed. It basically, with hate speech, was that, at the time that hate speech went into the bill, the people who were saying very offensive things and upsetting society were then trying to turn around and say, I'm not being a racist. Some of my best friends are black. Those kinds of things, and it's basically ensuring that there's accountability. Obviously, it's better for people to learn. I don't know. I mean, there was a debate around the sentences, and it was quite a difficult issue about we're having a bill to say that hate crime and hate speech is serious. We don't want to provide too much for restorative justice, for alternative sentences, because maybe the NPA would go that route. I did hear about one case relating to somebody convicted for homophobia who got sentenced to work in a organization working in the gay sector, and apparently it wasn't a success. The accused didn't want to be there. He really was intolerant to gays, and the organization that had him didn't want him there either. But there's nothing stopping restorative justice and diversions and rehabilitation from being followed. Obviously, we would rather get people's heads right in terms of their attitude of disliking other people because of the groups they belong. We'd rather that they learned that rather than trying to drum it into them.
I think we're all looking to have that kind of education, Deputy Minister. Maybe you can also just speak more to what are some of the sanctions that the bill seeks to impose.
Yeah, look, the sanctions are there's a schedule to the bill which increases the sentences for serious cases. So rape generally it has minimum sentences. The life sentences are for multiple rapes, rape of children, that kind of thing. Now, as far as I recall, rape as a hate crime would attract a life sentence. And just to remind everybody that that is a serious problem in our country in terms of the so-called corrective rape of lesbians that was quite prevalent about 10 years ago. It's luckily, I think, reduced a bit. So it does increase the sentences. With hate speech, so there are minimum sentences basically for hate crimes, depending on the different categories. For hate speech, there's no minimum sentence. There was quite a lot of debate about this in the committee. The committee decided to have the maximum sentence of 8 years. So that's the maximum, not the minimum. There's no minimum. It's up to the court. But I think the issue was that let's say somebody says something and that results in wide scale, or shortly after that, there are wide scale attacks on foreigners, on migrants, whatever, and lots of people are injured and property burnt and maybe even killed. You can't link that person to that crime through incitement, but what they said was hate speech, and it looks like it had a serious impact, so that the court should have the opportunity to impose a severe sentence if the need be. One would not want to, one would hope that people are not generally sent to prison for hate speech, at least if it's a first offense. But yeah, that's basically the sentencing regime.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I think just with the debates that have happened, around the bill, it seems to be that people think that the introduction of this bill is something that's a bit of a phenomenon. Maybe you could just explain, why it is that it's important to implement this now, but also how other countries in the world have similar legislation and how that has worked for them.
Yeah, look, other countries have similar legislation in different forms in their criminal codes and so on. And then some are still working on it. So in Ireland, for example, they've got a bill before Parliament. They've got a hate crimes law. They've got a new bill sort of extending the terms of that. It's been part of the argument. The DA has been trying to say that there isn't any international requirement, treaty requirement for hate speech and hate crime legislation. That's not the case. The International Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, Clause 4A, sorry, because I've just come from, from the debate in Parliament, directs countries to criminalize such acts. One example with the UK is that the number of cases of hate crimes, hate speech have increased. From a positive side, they're not sure if it's because there's an increase in hate crimes and hate speech, or whether it's just that people feel more confident about reporting it. But they have increased by about, I think, 20% or so, 27% over the past year. And the cases that go to prosecution end up with, well, the conviction rate has been at 80%. So it does seem to be working. Obviously, this is, well, it's to some extent new ground. I mean, as I say, we've got criminuria, but we'll have to see how it goes. And I'm sure there's always room for improvement.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. I think we all know, or most of us are aware of just how contentious this bill has been. We've seen how numerous submissions have been made to Parliament, whether it's from religious groups, comedians, all sorts of people. Maybe you could just share with us just some of the challenges that have been highlighted in the submissions made to Parliament.
Sorry, I just missed that. Can you just repeat?
Sure. I was just saying that, this bill has been widely debated across all sectors of society, whether it be religious groups, comedians, all kinds of politicians, all kinds of people, and submissions have been made to Parliament based on the draft of this bill. What have been some of the submissions that have been made, the more prevalent submissions, and what are some of those challenges that have been highlighted with those submissions?
Look, there's been a lot of debate around the wording, the definition of harm, those kinds of things. I would say that opposition to the bill comes from three groups. There can be an overlap, but I think it's to some extent reflected in which parties oppose the bill. And I think the groups that are opposing the bill, the first would be people who don't want any restriction on freedom of speech. Absolute right. You can say anything you like. Doesn't matter how harmful it is, but you can't criminalize it. Which I think is a problem in terms of, if you look at the offense, that how the social fabric is undermined by somebody's use of the K word. But anyway, that would be the first group. The second group, so the free speeches, or absolute free speech. The second would, I think, be people who are concerned that their members or supporters may say racist things, and they don't want them to be to be penalized for this. And then the third group, which would be more the religious people, my own view is it relates to homophobia and being able to be homophobic from a religious perspective. As I said, when it comes to proselytizing, we can't stop people referring to religious texts. You know, there's a chapter, if you're Christian, there's a chapter of Leviticus, Christian or Jewish, there's a chapter of Leviticus which talks about if a man has sex with a man, they must be put to death. Yes, that's in the chapter of Leviticus. We can't stop people referring to it. But what is noteworthy is that same chapter of Leviticus talks about if you commit adultery, you must be put to death. Nobody looks at wanting that implemented anymore. That same chapter of Leviticus says if children abuse their parents, they must be put to death. So it's why the selective morality issues. But I think maybe I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I think the issue is that you can say things that are not pleasant, that are harmful even against people of different sexual orientation, gender identity, etc. But you can't say things that incite harm against them if you're proselytizing.
Thank you for that clarification, Deputy Minister. For the sake of time, we're going to open up the floor now for participants to be able to ask questions. I'm just going to start with one that I've seen from the chat group where Mr. Masuku asks, is there any recourse in the event that the police and the DPP decide to withdraw a case of hate speech?
Do you want me to take them one by one? I think, look, in terms of the national instructions and directives, I mean, obviously the police's job is to record the case and investigate it. It's the prosecution that are going to decide whether to prosecute or not. The bill does provide for the National Director of Public Prosecutions to issue instructions or whatever on matters including the circumstances in which a charge in respect of such an offense, hate crime or hate speech, may be withdrawn or prosecution stopped, and then the leading of evidence. So there is some provision for the NDPP to set out in directives what are those circumstances, and then I guess if you don't agree, you could take them on review, and then there is the provision that you can institute a private prosecution if they've declined to prosecute, and that would apply to other crimes as well.
Okay. Mr. Masuku also has quite a few other questions. He asked whether or not the bill distinguishes between action that is harmful or hurtful, and whether or not speech needs to result, does speech need to result to harmful? In other words, can a harmful speech, which does not translate into anything, still make the matter prosecutable?
Yeah, the requirement for hate speech is it's harmful or incite harm. So it can just be harmful on its own, and it must either promote or propagate hatred. So basically, harmful and promoting hatred is a ground for prosecution for hate speech.
Thank you for the clarification, Deputy Minister. Is there anyone else? Sorry, I think I muted myself. I just wanted to say, if there's anyone else who would like to ask a question, please quickly raise your hands and we'll open up the floor to you. So we have a question here that's just come in from Mr. Abu Bakr. It says, does the bill complement the cybercrimes bill in terms of the distribution of harmful content?
Yes. Communicate includes well, communication is displayed, written, illustrated, utterance, representational reference, or an electronic communication. So the intention is to include what's happening on social media. To include what's happening on social media. So it is, and an electronic communication means communication by means of data messages. So there is an intention to include that.
There is one last question that I've seen. I'm not quite sure if you would be able to share the reasoning with us. But Lunga here has written, it would be interesting to learn why other political parties are opposed to the bill.
Look, I in a sense gave my summary. The DA is saying it's not necessary. The bill is not necessary already. It's an aggravating fact, can be an aggravating factor for sentence. And then as far as hate speech, they're more on the line of saying that there should be sort of absolute freedom of speech. And shouldn't be criminalized. They feel Papuda is sufficient. They've not really engaged with the problem of but I mean, yeah, but I think also there's elements of, I mean, remember Penny Sparrow was a DA member. She was a person in a leadership position in the DA. I think the Freedom Front Plus, the concern is that many of them, or some of their members, end up saying racist things, and then ACDP is really, and the some of the religious groupings are really, I think, homophobia. I suspect Al Jamaa was also homophobia. Al Jamaa is open about not supporting or being against people of different sexual orientation. So that would be my assessment of the parties who oppose the bill this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. Mamelo Swart has a question to ask. I'm just going to ask them to please unmute themselves.
Oh, hi. My name is Mamelo. I just want to ask if maybe Deputy Minister knows how far is the bill gonna be passed, or just an estimation.
Okay, the bill was passed this afternoon by the National Assembly. So it's gone through the first house and the National Assembly. It's a national competency bill, what's called Section 75 of the Constitution. So it's the National Assembly which is the main house on a bill like this. It's then now being sent to the National Council of Provinces. The National Council of Provinces can't amend the bill, but they can propose amendments. But they will put it out for public comment. And so for people who want to engage further on the bill, you've got the opportunity to do so in the NCOP. And then it will depend on, but the NCOP process they don't engage with bills as much as the National Assembly. It will definitely be passed this year. I mean, now trying to answer your question, and it's a little bit like how long is a piece of string. If the NCOP does propose them, if they just concur with the bill, then it'll be quite quick. If they do propose amendments, then it must go back to the National Assembly, although the National Assembly doesn't have hearings on the new issues. But how long is a piece of string? Definitely before the end of the year, possibly before the end of June. There will, though, be some time lag between, well, then what happens is once it's been passed, it goes to the president. The president has to consider whether there's problems with the constitutionality. Definitely people will make submissions on that. So the president and the president's office will have to consider that. But once he's assented to the bill, then there's things that need to be done. So for example, these national directives for the police, national instructions for the police about how they are to deal with issues, and the directives from the NPA will need to be done. So it's not going to be an immediate implementation. It will, even once passed, take a bit of time to be able to come into effect.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. I think that is all of the questions for the night. I hope that everyone that's taken part has learned a bit more, but also you've answered our burning question: when will this bill come into act? So I'm glad to hear that it will be before the end of this year. I'd just like to pass on to Mr. Rashid Sidat just to give a closing for us and a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I'm visible or something. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, firstly, I think it is fortuitous that the debate and the approval in the National Assembly happened at the same time as today's discussion, and I think it maybe it's symbolic in a way that that approval happened during Human Rights Week. So I think let's not forget that sort of symbolism that we see. Also to say that I think from our point of view as the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, we're really happy that the bill is further down the pipeline. As TM was saying, it might still take some time, but at least we know that the process is certainly underway. I think that from the point of view of our objective for this session, really enlightening people, I think we've had a fantastic question and answer session. So thank you very much both to Retabile and the Deputy Minister for really, I think, enlightening all of us who participated in today's proceedings. Yeah, so and of course, thank you to the participants for finding time this evening during supper time and family time to really get some sense of what the bill is saying, and I think we appreciate that. Just to say that also that the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation is having several events, but in a similar vein, on Thursday we'll be in conversation with Ellen Tambo from the South African Human Rights Commission on Equality Courts. So you can see that the focus of these two webinars are really on the instruments that we use to address issues like racism and so on. So I think, and of course there are a number of other initiatives as we head towards the 21st of March. Yeah, and that's all I would like to say. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.